Number 1. The Derinkuyu Underground City. Picture a man in the town of Derinkuyu in central Turkey in 1963 swinging a hammer at the wall of his own basement. He is only renovating his home. The wall gives way and cold air pours out of the darkness behind it. He has just opened a tunnel that drops into a city carved 18 levels deep into the rock. This was not a cellar. It was the top of a hidden world. The scale is hard to hold in your mind. The complex descends roughly 85 meters underground. It could shelter as many as 20,000 people at once, along with their animals and their food. Every meter of it was cut by hand into soft volcanic tuff, the ash stone left by the ancient eruptions of nearby volcanoes. The rock is soft enough to carve, yet it hardens when it meets the air, which is exactly why the tunnels never collapsed. The people who built it thought about everything. More than 50 vertical shafts brought in air, and some of those shafts doubled as wells, drawing water from deep below without ever exposing it to enemies above. Great circular stone doors, each one weighing between 200 and 500 kilograms, could be rolled across the passages and locked from the inside only. A tunnel several kilometers long even connected Derinkuyu to another underground city nearby. Turkish authorities credit the first digging to the Phrygians in the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era. Later, Byzantine Christians expanded it and hid inside during the Arab Wars of the 7th and 8th centuries. Down in the dark, there were stables, wine and oil presses, kitchens with soot-blackened ceilings, chapels, and even a room that looks like a school. So who really built it, and why? The mainstream view says it grew slowly over centuries as a defensive refuge. A second view holds it was a permanent shelter against harsh climate and raids alike. And a fringe view insists the deepest levels are far older than anyone admits, a relic of some lost antiquity. That last idea has little hard evidence behind it, but the sheer ambition of the place keeps it alive. Now imagine being that man in 1963, realizing his house sat on top of a buried city. That unease, the feeling that the ground is hollow beneath you, is exactly where we are going next, to a hillside where the diggers found something far worse than empty tunnels. Number 2. The Puruchuco Inca Cemetery. On the eastern edge of Lima, Peru, a shantytown called Tupac Amaru grew across a dusty hillside. Families dug foundations and trenches for their new homes, and again, their shovels struck bundles of cloth. Inside, those bundles were bodies. They had built their neighborhood directly on top of a vast Inca cemetery. Between 1999 and 2001, the Peruvian archaeologist Guillermo Koch led a desperate rescue excavation, backed by National Geographic. His team recovered more than 2,200 mummy bundles and estimated the full cemetery held up to 10,000 people. The burials date to roughly 1480 to 1535 of the Common Era, the last decades of the Inca Empire and the arrival of the Spanish. The dead were placed seated, with their knees drawn up, then wrapped in layer after layer of raw cotton and patterned cloth. Some bundles held as many as 7 individuals together. The largest, nicknamed the Cotton King, weighed several hundred kilograms and contained an adult, an infant, and hundreds of objects. Many bundles were topped with a false head, a stuffed cloth bump sometimes fitted with a wig, so the wrapping took on a human shape that seemed to stare back. The desert dryness of Lima had mummified them naturally, with no embalming at all. But the living were not kind to the dead. Raw sewage from the houses above seeped down into the graves, staining and rotting bundles before archaeologists could reach them. Children were being raised on a floor of ancestors. The grave goods ran the full social range, from simple tools to fine textiles, and analysis of the cloth revealed sophisticated weaving with regional dye signatures. Studies of the bones traced a diet of maize, seafood, and highland foods, showing Lima as a meeting point of coastal and Andean peoples. Some of the skeletons told an even darker story. They bore terrible wounds from iron weapons and injuries that looked like gunshot trauma. Koch connected these victims to the Inca siege of Lima in 1536, when native forces fought the army of Francisco Pizarro. The mainstream reading is simply an ordinary cemetery caught by urban sprawl. A second reading sees the wounded as casualties of that conquest-era battle. A more speculative view wonders whether some deaths reflect ritual or epidemic, though the evidence there is thin. What makes Puruchuco haunting is that it was not a royal tomb. It was everyone. Infants, elders, workers, an entire community preserved and then paved over. The collision of poverty, development, and the ancient dead is a story Lima keeps living. and it introduces a theme that will follow us underground again and again, the modern world building directly on top of the past. Next, we travel to a village that did not wait to be built over. It burned and fell straight into the mud. Number 3. Must Farm, Britain's Pompeii. In the flat fens of Cambridgeshire, England, machines were peeling clay out of a brick quarry when they exposed something charred and ancient. Blackened wooden timbers stood in the mud. They belonged to a settlement that had been alive around 850 before the Common Era, in the late Bronze Age. Timbers here were first spotted by the archaeologist Francis Pryor back in 1999. But the full excavation came in 2015 to 2016, led by Mark Knight of the Cambridge Archaeological Unit. A colleague gave the site its nickname, Britain's Pompeii, and for once the comparison was earned. The village was built as a cluster of large round houses raised on stilts above a slow river channel. Within about a year of being built, it caught fire. The burning houses collapsed straight down into the soft silt below. And that combination, fire and water and airless mud, preserved the everyday world of these people almost perfectly. The finds are astonishing. Complete pots were recovered with food residues still inside them, the remains of meals interrupted forever. There were wooden platters, buckets, and finely carved bowls. There were textiles woven from lime bast and nettle fiber, among the finest Bronze Age fabrics ever found in Britain. Glass and amber beads showed trade links reaching all the way to the Mediterranean and the Near East. Near one house lay the most complete Bronze Age wheel ever found in the country, about 1 meter across. In the channel below sat logboats. For the archaeologists, walking into that layer was like walking into a single frozen moment. Objects lay roughly where they had last been set down. You could almost read the panic of the fire in the scatter of a household. How the fire started is still debated. The mainstream view is a simple accident, a hearth catching in a young timber settlement. A second view argues for deliberate arson, perhaps a raid or an attack. A third, more contested idea suggests the villagers burned the site themselves in some ritual act of closing it down. What no one disputes is the eeriness of the result, an entire community caught mid-meal and dropped into the dark. That sense of a life interrupted and sealed away carries us to our next site. Because sometimes the thing the workers find is not a house or a grave. Sometimes it is a temple, and they hid it while digging a subway line straight through the heart of a modern capital. Number 4. The Pino Suárez Wind God Pyramid. In the 1960s, crews were tunneling the Mexico City metro beneath one of the largest cities on Earth. At the site of what would become Pino Suárez Station, on Line 2, they struck a round platform of ancient stone. It was not part of any plan, and it could not simply be knocked out of the way. Archaeologists identified it as an Aztec shrine, a small stepped pyramid dedicated to Ehecatl Quetzalcoatl, the wind god. It dates to around the 15th century of the Common Era. The temple is circular, and that shape was deliberate. Round temples were built for the wind god so that the wind itself could flow freely around him with no sharp corners to block it. The engineers made a remarkable choice. Rather than destroy the pyramid, they built the station around it. To this day, it stands inside the working subway, between the platforms, one of the only pre-Hispanic monuments enshrined in a metro system anywhere in the world. Millions of commuters pass it without a second glance. What makes this so striking is where it sits. Mexico City was built directly on top of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, which the Spanish razed after the siege of 1521. The Aztecs had founded that island city back in 1325, and they built temple over temple, layer over layer. The soft lakebed beneath the modern city keeps sinking. And as it sinks, it keeps pushing the buried past back toward the surface. Just over a decade after the metro find, in 1978, electricity workers digging nearby struck an enormous carved stone. It was the Coyolxauhqui monolith, and it led straight to the Great Temple, the Templo Mayor, launching an excavation that continues today. So what was the Wind God Shrine? The mainstream view is a modest neighborhood temple preserved by luck. A second view places it within a much larger ceremonial precinct still hidden under the streets. A more speculative idea suggests it was carefully aligned to the winds or the stars, though that is hard to prove from so small a structure. The real power of Pino Suárez is the layering. A subway, a colonial city, and an Aztec temple, stacked in a single vertical slice of time. Stand on that platform, and you are standing inside a timeline. And that theme, a city built on the ruins of its own dead, is about to get darker, because our next crew broke into a temple built for a cult that worshipped in the dark. Number 5. The Walbrook Mithraeum. In 1954, London was still rebuilding from the war. On a bomb site in the heart of the city, construction crews were clearing ground for a new office block called Bucklersbury House. As they dug beside the buried course of a stream called the Walbrook, they uncovered stone foundations and then a carved marble face staring up out of the mud. The excavation, led by the archaeologist William Grimes, revealed a Roman temple, a Mithraeum, built around the middle of the 3rd century of the Common Era. On the 18th of September, 1954, the marble head of the god Mithras was lifted from the ground. The discovery caused a sensation. Tens of thousands of Londoners queued for hours to see the ruins before the developers moved back in. The temple was about 18 meters long, laid out like a small basilica with a central nave. Buried within it lay a careful cache of marble sculptures, heads of Mithras, of Minerva, of the Egyptian god Serapis, and a figure of Mercury. There was also a relief showing Mithras killing the cosmic bull, dedicated by a man named Ulpius Silvanus, a veteran of the 2nd Augustan Legion. Mithraism was a mystery cult, especially popular with Roman soldiers and merchants. It had 7 grades of initiation, and its temples were built to feel like caves, windowless and dark, echoing the cave where Mithras was said to have slain the bull. Later, the London temple seems to have been rededicated, apparently, to Bacchus. Why were the sculptures buried? The mainstream view is that the temple was simply abandoned and repurposed as the cult faded. A second view holds that worshippers deliberately hid the statues to protect them. A third suggests they were concealed to keep the cult safe from rising Christian hostility. The debate is unresolved. The temple itself had a strange afterlife. In 1962, its stones were dismantled and rebuilt about 100 meters away at street level in a reconstruction many experts disliked. Then, in 2017, it was moved again, back near its original spot, 7 meters beneath the new Bloomberg building. Mithraism itself had spread across the Roman world along the routes of the army, and London, as a busy trading hub, was exactly the kind of place its soldiers and merchants gathered. That later construction produced a second treasure. More than 400 Roman writing tablets came out of the wet Walbrook mud, including the earliest dated handwritten document ever found in Britain from the 8th of January, 57 of the Common Era. The damp ground had preserved the very words of Roman Londoners. And damp ground preserving the impossible is exactly what we find next when a subway breaks into a drowned harbor full of ships. Number 6. The Naples Metro Roman ships. Beneath the city of Naples, in Italy, subway crews were excavating for a new station at Piazza Municipio. Deep down, they broke into black, waterlogged mud that carried the smell of the sea. They had cut straight into the buried ancient harbor of Neapolis, the Greek and then Roman port over which modern Naples was built. The work, directed by the local heritage authority with the archaeologist Daniela Giampaola among its leaders, uncovered something few people ever expect from a subway dig. At least 3 Roman-era shipwrecks lay preserved in the airless harbor mud, dating to around the 1st century of the Common Era. The lack of oxygen had kept the wooden hulls intact, along with rope, leather sandals, and the remains of cargo. The harbor had slowly silted up between the 4th and 5th centuries of the Common Era, sealing everything beneath it. As the crews dug, thousands of artifacts emerged, from storage jars and coins to everyday objects dropped and lost in the port. The team mapped the ancient shoreline, now far inland from today's coast, and even read the working lives of the ships and the scars left by shipworm in their timbers. Neapolis had been founded by Greek colonists around the 6th century before the Common Era, and it grew into a key Roman port. The new station was redesigned to display these finds, turning a place of daily transit into a window on the ancient sea. Preserving the ships was its own battle. Waterlogged wood looks solid, but it can crumble the moment it dries. Conservators had to lift each timber with care and stabilize it slowly with chemicals to save it. Why were the ships there? The mainstream view is that these were ordinary working vessels lost or abandoned as the harbor gradually died. A second view proposes that a single flood or storm sank several at once. A third, minority idea suggests some were deliberately scuttled to help build up the quay. The sediment layers themselves record storms and the slow death of the port. There is something powerful about drowned infrastructure, a harbor that once bustled now buried under a piazza. The theme threading through all of this is that the ground beneath our busiest places is never empty. It is packed with the wreckage of everything that came before. And sometimes, what surfaces is not a ship or a temple, but a single piece of a human being, 400,000 years old, tumbling out of a gravel pit. Number 7. The Swanscombe Skull. In 1935, in a gravel quarry at Swanscombe in Kent, England, a dentist and amateur naturalist named Alvin Marston was searching the aggregate when he spotted a piece of bone. It was part of a human skull, and it was impossibly old. The gravel being dug there fed the building trade, and it had just given up one of the oldest human fossils ever found in Britain. What happened next is one of the strangest coincidences in all of archaeology. The skull came out in 3 separate pieces found across 20 years. Marston found the back of the skull, the occipital bone, on the 25th of June, 1935. The left side, a parietal bone, turned up in 1936. The right parietal was not found until 1955. When the 3 pieces were finally brought together, they fit. The skull dates to around 400,000 years ago, during a warm period called the Hoxnean Interglacial. It belonged to an archaic human, either an early Neanderthal or a member of the species Homo heidelbergensis. For decades it was called Swanscombe man, though it is now generally thought to have belonged to a woman. Its brain capacity was about 1,325 cubic centimeters, well within the modern human range. The bones lay among Acheulean hand axes, the elegant teardrop-shaped stone tools of the era. Around them were the remains of animals long vanished from Britain, straight-tusked elephants and rhinoceros, because the climate then was warm. In that age, the River Thames ran on a different course, laying down the gravels that would one day entomb the skull and then surrender it to a quarry. The scientific debate is genuine. The mainstream view sees Swanscombe as an early member of the Neanderthal lineage. A second view classifies it as Homo heidelbergensis before the Neanderthals had fully emerged. A third leaves open the possibility of a distinct local population. What the skull records is a deeper truth, that early humans colonized Britain, were driven out by the ice, and returned again and again. Modern dating methods, including uranium series and amino acid techniques, later refined the age estimate and confirmed just how old the skull really is. There's a footnote here worth remembering. Marston defended the antiquity of his find fiercely, and time proved him right, especially against the infamous Piltdown skull, exposed as a forgery in 1953. Swanscombe was real, and it was ancient. From a European quarry, we now travel to a sewer trench in China where the diggers pulled up something that glittered. Number 8. The Jinsha Ritual Site. In February of 2001, in the Qingyang district of Chengdu, in China, a construction crew was cutting a drainage trench through the red earth. Their tools turned up ivory and jade. Work stopped, archaeologists rushed in, and a Bronze Age ritual center began to emerge from the ground beneath a modern building project. The site belongs to the Shu culture, and it dates to roughly 1200 to 650 before the Common Era. It is seen as a successor to the earlier and famous Sanxingdui civilization, about 50 kilometers away, and its most beautiful find has become a national symbol. That find is the golden sunbird. It is a wafer of gold foil about 12.5 centimeters across and only about 0.02 centimeters thick, showing 4 birds circling a swirling sun. The gold is more than 94% pure. In 2005, it was chosen as the emblem of China's cultural heritage. But the sunbird was only the beginning. The diggers uncovered thousands of objects. There were gold masks, jade tubes and blades, bronzes, and small stone figures. Hundreds of elephant tusks had been buried at the site, pointing both to elaborate ritual and to a warmer, forested ancient landscape. Among the finds were small kneeling figures with their hands bound behind them, which may represent captives or sacrificial victims. No city walls have been found at Jinsha. That absence has led archaeologists to read it not as a fortress or a capital in the usual sense, but as a religious and ceremonial center, a sacrificial zone beside a former course of the river. Many of the offerings had been deliberately broken or burned before being buried. So what was Jinsha? The mainstream view is that it was a ritual heart of the Shu kingdom. A second view suggests it was settled by people moving away from a declining Sangsing-Dui. A more speculative idea links it to a wider lost civilization, though that reaches beyond the evidence. What Jinsha proved beyond doubt is that the Shu kingdom, long known only from legend, was real, wealthy, and sophisticated. In 2007, a museum was built directly over the site to protect it. A drainage trench had opened a window onto a forgotten kingdom. And if a sewer dig can uncover a lost culture, then our next site shows what happens when farmers, simply trying to find water, break into the tomb guard of an emperor. Number 9. The Terracotta Army. On the 29th of March 1974, near Xi'an in Shanxi Province, China, a group of farmers were digging a well during a drought. Deep in the dry earth, their tools struck fragments of hard clay. One of them, a man named Yang Jifa, and his brothers pulled up pieces of a life-size figure. They thought at first they had disturbed a temple idol. They had, in fact, broken into one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. Beneath their feet lay the guardian army of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. The emperor died in 210 before the Common Era, and this army was buried around that time to protect him in the afterlife. Estimates put the buried force at about 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, and 670 horses, spread across several vast pits. Every warrior stands life-size, and every face is different, with individual features, hairstyles, and armor. They were once brightly painted, though much of the pigment flaked away within moments of meeting the air after 2,000 years underground. The largest pit alone stretches about 230 meters. The soldiers carried real bronze weapons, swords, crossbow triggers, and spearheads, some of them still sharp when found. On certain blades, scientists found a thin layer of chromium, which sparked a long debate over whether it was a deliberate anti-rust treatment or simply an accident of the soil. Nearby lies the emperor's tomb mound, still unexcavated. The ancient historian Sima Qian wrote that it contained rivers of mercury flowing across a map of the empire. For a long time that sounded like legend, until soil tests around the mound revealed strangely high levels of mercury, exactly as the account described. Building all of this is thought to have taken hundreds of thousands of laborers over decades. The bodies were mass-produced from molds, then finished by hand to make each face unique. The ranks are easy to read, from kneeling archers to armored generals. The pits were once roofed with timber, which later collapsed and shattered the figures, so today's archaeologists rebuild whole warriors from thousands of broken fragments. The army was recognized as a World Heritage Site in 1987, and still, most of the main mausoleum remains sealed, left untouched until we can preserve whatever waits inside. From an emperor's buried army, we go to our last site, where a shopping center in England peeled back a Viking street, complete with a very human surprise. Number 10. The Coppergate Viking Dig. In the city of York, England, between 1976 and 1981, developers were preparing to build a shopping center on a street called Coppergate. Before the concrete went in, archaeologists from the York Archaeological Trust, led by Richard Hall, moved onto the site. What they peeled back layer by wet layer was the Viking city of Jorvik, preserved from the 9th and 10th centuries of the Common Era. The ground here was waterlogged and airless, and that saved everything. Timber buildings still stood in outline. Wattle fences, workshop floors, and whole house plots survived where they would normally have rotted to nothing. The team recovered around 40,000 artifacts and 5 tons of animal bone. There was debris from metalworking, textile production, and the crafting of amber, jet, and bone into jewelry. The very name Coppergate means the street of the cup makers. But the find that made Coppergate famous is far less refined. It is the Lloyd's Bank coprolite, a fossilized piece of human waste about 20 centimeters long. Analysis showed a diet of bread and meat and a heavy burden of intestinal parasites. It is often described as one of the largest preserved human feces ever studied, and it tells us, bluntly, how these people actually lived. That is the deeper value of Jorvik. It showed the Vikings not as a mere raiders' camp, but as a dense, thriving trading town. Imported goods trace links to the Rhineland and the Baltic. Preserved leather shoes, textiles, and wooden objects gave an intimate picture of daily life. Environmental samples even let scientists reconstruct the smells, the diet, and the insects of the streets. The city had deep foundations of its own. Long before the Vikings, it had been the Roman fortress of Eboracum, then the Anglo-Saxon town of Eoforwic. Each people rebuilt on the same ground. The interpretations here are less about mystery and more about meaning. The mainstream view is a flourishing Viking commercial city. A second view stresses a deliberately planned Scandinavian trading foundation. A third points to continuity all the way from Roman times. What everyone agrees on is how much life survives in the right mud. The dig led directly to the Jorvik Viking Center, which opened in 1984, and recreates those streets for visitors. 10 sites, 10 accidents of the shovel. Now let us step back and ask what they share and why the ground gives up its secrets so rarely and so strangely. Look closely at these 10 discoveries, and one thing connects them. In every case, something unusual about the ground stopped the normal process of decay. Left to itself, the earth destroys almost everything. Wood rots, cloth crumbles, flesh vanishes, paint fades. What we found at these sites are the rare exceptions, and each one owes its survival to a special condition. At Must Farm, at Naples, and at Coppergate, the secret was water without oxygen. Waterlogged, airless mud starves the microbes that break things down, so timber, leather, and even textiles can last for thousands of years. At Puruchuco, it was the opposite extreme, the bone-dry desert of the Peruvian coast, which mummified bodies without any embalming at all. At Derinkuyu, it was the volcanic tuff, soft to carve but stable once exposed, holding open a city in the rock. At Must Farm, fire itself played a double role, destroying the village while charring and sealing its contents into the silt. There's a cruel paradox at the center of all this. The events that seem most destructive, a fire, a flood, a collapse, are often exactly what create the finest preservation. A slow, gentle end leaves nothing behind. A sudden catastrophe can freeze a moment in time, but preservation is fragile, and it does not survive contact with our world easily. Pigment on the terracotta warriors flaked away in moments once the air reached it. Waterlogged wood can turn to mush as it dries. Every one of these discoveries became a race, to record and stabilize the finds before they crumbled. Across the 20th century, conservators slowly learned how to lift and save such material, with controlled handling, chemical treatments, freeze-drying, and careful, patient drying. Deep burial helped too, shielding structures from weathering and from being torn apart and reused by later builders, so that what lay lowest often survived best. The lesson is humbling. The earth is not a reliable archive, it is a shredder that, now and then, by pure chance, keeps a single page intact. For every buried city and frozen village we have found, countless others simply dissolved into the ground, leaving no trace at all. So the next time you see ordinary soil, remember that it is full of hidden conditions, and that whether anything survives is a matter of luck. Which raises the next question. If survival is luck, then so is discovery. And discovery almost never comes from the people you would expect. Here's the pattern that should unsettle you most. Not one of these 10 sites was found by an archaeologist looking for it. They were found by workers. A man renovating his basement opened Derinkuyu. Trench diggers uncovered the dead at Puruchuco and the gold at Jinsha. Quarry crews exposed the burned village at Must Farm and the ancient skull at Swanscombe. Metro tunnelers struck the Wind God Temple in Mexico City and the drowned ships in Naples. A bombsite building crew found the Roman temple in London. Farmers digging a well broke into the Emperor's army at Sion. And groundworks for a shopping center revealed the Viking streets at Coppergate. This is how most of the past actually surfaces, not through careful research digs, but through infrastructure and extraction, through the machinery of the modern world cutting into the old one. It is why so much of archaeology today is rescue archaeology, a race against the bulldozer carried out in the narrow window between a discovery and a deadline. And it takes a human toll. Imagine being an ordinary worker who expected only clay or water, and instead uncovering a wrapped child, a burned house, or a face staring up from the mud. These are not neutral experiences. Many people who make such finds carry them for the rest of their lives. That is the quiet meaning hidden in the title of this story, The Workers Who Were Traumatized Forever. Most countries now have laws that halt construction the moment significant remains appear, which sets up a constant tension between the pressure to build and the duty to preserve. Not every find survives that tension. Many are quietly destroyed or looted or simply never reported, lost in the gap between profit and history. There's a strange democracy in all of this. The past does not reveal itself to experts alone. It waits under everyone's feet, and it can be uncovered by anyone with a shovel and bad luck. Which leads to a deeper pattern still, because these finds keep turning up in the same kinds of places directly beneath the cities where we live. Notice where so many of these discoveries happened, not in remote wilderness, but under living cities. Mexico City sits on Tenochtitlan, Naples sits on Neapolis, London sits on Roman Londinium, York sits on Eboracum, and in Lima, a whole neighborhood was built on top of an Inca cemetery. This is one of the great truths of human settlement. We build where people have always built, on the same good ground, beside the same rivers and harbors. So our cities are not single places, they are stacks, layer upon layer of occupation, each generation raising its world on the ruins of the last. Capitals and ports accumulate the deepest archaeology of all because they have been desirable for the longest time. The physical processes only deepen the stack. Cities sink into soft ground, harbors silt over, rubble raises the street level century by century. In Mexico City, the sinking lakebed keeps pushing the Aztec Pass back toward the surface. In London, the damp Walbrook Valley swallowed and preserved Roman tablets. The ground is always moving, always bearing, and occasionally revealing. There is something deeply uneasy about this intimacy with the dead. In Lima, families raise children directly above thousands of mummies. In York, people shop where Vikings once emptied their bowels into the mud. We walk, sleep, and build over the ancestors constantly, mostly without knowing it. Each culture that made these sites had its own attitude to disturbing the dead, and each modern city has faced the same hard choice when the past resurfaces, whether to preserve it, move it, or destroy it and keep building. What ties it together is memory, buried in the most ordinary places. The temple inside a subway station, the cemetery under a slum, the Bronze Age skull in a gravel pit feeding a cement works. Every generation forgets what lies beneath it until a shovel reminds them. And when the reminder comes, it is not always wonder that the workers feel. Sometimes it is something much heavier. It is easy to treat these discoveries as marvels, as headlines and museum pieces. But we should not forget what they actually were to the people who first uncovered them. At Puruchuco, workers pulled mummified children out of the ground where they had hoped to build homes. At Coppergate, diggers handled the intimate, parasite-ridden remains of human bodies and human waste. At Jinsha, they unearthed kneeling figures with bound hands, echoes of sacrifice. At the London Mithraeum, they exposed the imagery of a secretive blood cult that killed bulls in the dark. At Derinkuyu, they crawled through tunnels deliberately built as ambush traps, narrow enough to force a man to his knees. At Mus Farm, they walked into a village burned and frozen mid-meal, a home caught in its worst moment. None of these workers signed up for that. They came to lay a subway line, to cut a trench, to quarry gravel, to find water. What they met instead was the past at its most raw, and often at its most disturbing. The line between scientific wonder and genuine horror can be very thin, and it is the person holding the shovel who stands right on it. There's an ethical weight here too. We take these dead, these sacred objects, these private lives, and we turn them into exhibits and even into rides. Communities end up living alongside their own exposed past, sometimes proud of it, sometimes haunted by it. Discovery is never only awe, it is also disturbance, an intrusion into something that was meant to stay buried and still. That is the truth the title points at. Behind every glittering find is a moment when an ordinary person confronted something they were not prepared to see. Some of them never quite shook it off. And it leaves us with one last question about everything that is still down there, waiting. 10 sites across 4 continents in thousands of years, and every one of them found by accident. If that is true, then the obvious conclusion is almost frightening. What we have found is only a fraction of what remains. Consider what we already know is still hidden. Beneath the Nevşehir fortress in Turkey, there are hints of an underground city even larger than Derinkuyu. Near Siyan, the tomb of the first emperor lies sealed. its rumored rivers of mercury untouched, waiting for a technology that can open it safely. In Lima, an unknown number of mummy bundles were lost to construction and looting before anyone could record them. Under every old city on Earth, more lies buried than has ever been seen. This is the balance every society has to strike between building the future and honoring the past that lies in its way. Each discovery reframes what we thought we knew. A drainage trench rewrites a kingdom, a well dig reveals an emperor's army, a basement wall opens a city. So much of it comes down to chance, to what happened to survive, and to who happened to be digging on the day it appeared. It is worth remembering that these were never just exhibits, they were living communities with meals and children and gods and fears of their own. And it is worth asking, honestly, what today's construction is quietly destroying right now in the narrow gap between the discovery and the deadline. In the end, the true instrument of history is not the scholar's pen. It is the worker's shovel, breaking without warning into a world that was supposed to stay lost. Every foundation, every tunnel, every trench is a potential doorway into a past nobody expected to meet that morning. The deepest history is not in distant ruins. It is in the ordinary ground beneath your feet. And the most unsettling truth of all is simple. The earth is never really empty.